Alright, so in this lesson we will start exploring the Effect Controls panel. As I showed you in an earlier lesson, if you click on a clip in your timeline, then you will get these options. And if you don't click, they go away. So if we, for example, let's go to a wide shot here. Say we wanted this clip to be zoomed in just a little bit. With this clip selected, you'll see that these show up now. We can mess with the time remapping of the clip, which is the speed of the clip. We can change the opacity, which means if this clip was here and we had a different clip underneath, we can adjust the opacity of this clip, which will start revealing the clip underneath it. So to give you an example of that, let's move this clip underneath. We'll take this clip, we'll go to opacity, and we can start lowering the opacity. And the clip below it will start to show until it's all the way. This is a very important tip. Now it may be different in your version, but in this version, by default, it creates what's known as a keyframe. That means that this point in time on that clip, it's locking in 100%. If we were to highlight that keyframe and delete it, it's still highlighted. So in order for the entire clip to show up with the adjusted change, let's say of 20%, that means the bottom clip is showing through. Then because we never adjusted this, the keyframe shows up and the whole clip will be 20%. However, if we were to come back to this clip later and forget we did that and adjusted this, then we've created a second keyframe. So this is not a great thing, because from this keyframe all the way to that keyframe, it will animate from 20 to 64%. And that's not what we want. So to get around that, let's undo so that we're right back to where we started. We can click on the clip, go to opacity. It's defaulted to 100% and it has the stopwatch enabled. So to get around that, we simply click it and then it goes away. So now, no matter what we do to this clip at any point in time, throughout the whole clip, it'll always stay like that. Stopwatches are used in order to set keyframes so that you can change the animation over time. So for the opacity, the majority of the time you will not need to change the opacity unless, let's say, you're at the very end want to fade out. But if you want to do that, there are transitions inside Premiere already that you can just apply, and it'll do that in a couple clicks as opposed to making a bunch of keyframes and changing the percentages. Let's keep that at 100%. Let's move this clip back here. Let's bring this clip back down and reselect the clip. Inside the motion tab, the default is set to 960 by 540, which is half of 1920 and half of 1080. These represent the center points of the clip. So if we were to move the position, the 960, which is the horizontal parts of your clip, we would move this, and dependent on your center point of the clip, which is 960, half of 1920, it'll start to move the clip. Okay, so we can click on the reset parameter button to bring us back to 960, or we can do the vertical and move it wherever we would like. Let's reset that. If we wanted to scale in on this clip, this is where we would do that. We would simply click and hold and drag right or left to scale in or scale out. Now if we scale out, you can see that we are revealing the black parts around the clip now. So if we did have a clip below it, then we would see the clip now on the outside layer. This can be a cool way of creating some intermediate effects inside Premiere Pro. Let's set that back to 100%. And instead of clicking and dragging, you can also type in the number that you want. So that's at 110, which means if we position the clip, we have a little bit more to play with before the black is revealed. Let's reset this. So if you didn't like, let's say, this grass area, then what we can do is you'd scale in about half of it. So because we went to about half, we can move the whole thing right by about half. which should bring us to about here. So let's bring the position to the right, and let's go back on the left side there just until the black isn't shown. And it's not enough, so we want to go to about here, let's say, if we were wanting to crop this off. So let's zoom in just a little more and bring it more to the right, and that's close enough. So if we wanted to lower this now, we can also do the exact same by clicking and holding on the horizontal and going down until just the black part isn't shown. So now when we play this clip, it'll be cropped in a little bit. Now keep in mind, this is a 1080p sequence, which is 1920 by 1080, that's full HD. This clip is full HD, so when you scale in, you will lose a little bit of resolution. So on an HD timeline, working with HD clips, I would never go more than maybe 115 or 120%. Okay, so let's reset both of those. The next thing we have is the rotation. This is pretty straightforward. It's 0 to 360. You can spin it all the way up to 360, and then it starts becoming one full rotation plus 24 degrees. Two full rotations plus 204. Let's reset that. Let's say you shot your footage slightly off balance, then you can adjust it by working like that and then scaling in a little bit to make up for it. I rarely work with the anchor point, so I would leave that as is. And the anti-flicker is okay if you're trying to remove some flicker in your footage. However, there are far better plugins out there, so if you do need to remove some flicker, I would suggest spending between $50 and a couple $100 and getting an actual plugin that is meant to do so. It performs much better. The next thing is your time remapping. Now, I normally don't do anything up here in the effect controls. Instead, how I work with time remapping is I use the rate stretch tool, which is R on your keyboard. So you press R, and then you have your rate stretch, and if we zoom in a little bit, we can go to the end and trim the clip in the same way we would with our regular tool. However, because we're using the rate stretch tool, it actually is speeding up the clip. So if we go back to our regular tool, which is our pressing V on the keyboard, if we right click and then go to speed duration, you can see that the rate stretch tool, by bringing it all the way to here, we've sped up the clip to 177.77%. If we wanted to bring that back, we can go to 100, and then it'll bring us right back to where we started. You can also slow down footage, but I wouldn't really do that. It tends to not look that great. I would go to about 92% at max for 23.976 footage. So what we can do is right click, go to speed duration and change that to 92%. And then it makes the clip a little longer, which if you need to fill in a little gap, that is the way to do it. So if we were to go to speed duration and then set it to like 40% to show you, it makes the clip very long, and that's because it's very slow now. So the playback will not look that great. It looks very jagged, and it looks like your computer is having a hard time playing it. However, that's not the case. It's just because there's not enough frames in a second to make it play smoothly. Let's press Command Z to go back to our original setting. We can confirm it by going to speed duration and that it's 100. We can also right click speed duration, and we have a few other options. We can reverse the speed, which will play the clip backwards. If there was audio, we can click this to maintain the audio pitch when changing the speed of the clip. And if we click this, it will ripple edit, and all of the clips after will move with it. So for example, let's change this to 150, and because we have this selected, you can see all the rest of the clips move to where it was. Let's undo that, go to speed duration, and do the exact same thing without that selected. And you'll see that now there's just a gap. Let's undo that. In this lesson, we will talk about transitions. Transitions are a great way to change from one clip to the other, and it adds a lot of production value because instead of just cutting to the next clip, you can have creative fades such as crossfades, dissolves, or you can have a fade that dips to black, to white, and then back to the new clip, or you could have purchased transitions or ones that you've created in After Effects that are meant as colorful animation designs that, when placed between two clips, creates a very cool look that transitions between one to the other. In order to add a transition, there are a few different ways you can do it. You can simply right-click and go Apply Default Transitions, and that right away created a cross dissolve in between these two clips, and this is what that looks like. Okay, without it, it looks like this. It just straight cuts. Let's move this over. Another way we can do it is by going into our Effects panel, go into Video Transitions, Dissolve, and you can see the one that has the colored outline. That's the one that is set to default. In order to change that, you can right-click another one and create it as the default transition. I would recommend keeping it as cross dissolve, as that is the one that is mostly used. Okay, so you can click on this and drag it down to where you'd like it. And that's the way it goes. Now the reason why it's adding it on this clip and not this clip is because when we were picking the select, the clip actually starts here. So for example, if we were to create it on this clip, if we move it up, we can see that there is more to play with on this side, whereas on this clip, there is no more. This clip has some more to play with. So let's bring that down. Let's bring that back to how it was. And because this clip has more to play with on this side as well, when we add a transition, it'll balance in the middle of both. So let's go to cross dissolve, drag it down, and you can see that now it's directly in the middle, as opposed to on this clip where it only goes on the right side. That's because this clip has more to play with on that, expanding this way, but this clip doesn't have any more to play on this side. Now, to further go into transitions, if we want it longer, we can put the mouse here until we get this symbol, click and drag, and then we can make a longer transition or a shorter transition. Now, a shorter transition will look like this, and a longer transition will look like this. Okay, so that's just to taste. You can make it as long as or as short as you want. This one will look like this. It's pretty much the same thing. It just happens earlier because it's showing more frames before the clip actually starts, because there's more clip to work with. And then simply click and drag or apply default transitions, or because this is selected, we can also press Command D, and that'll add a cross dissolve. Okay, so if we zoom in a little bit, and if we hold Shift, we can affect one side of the transition without affecting the other. Let's hold Shift and move the cursor right until we see the symbol change at the end, and then we can move this, and then you can see that the right side is longer than this side. So if we wanted to change this, if we did it without holding Shift, it would extend the right side by the same amount. Let's undo that. So what we can do is hold Shift and drag it, then it only affects this side. If we only wanted a very fast one frame transition, we can do it the same way. We can hold Shift and bring it all the way down. Or if we wanted 2 frames like that, we can do it that way as well. If we want to remove a transition, we can right click and go to clear, or we can select it and press delete. And just to clarify, with the Command D approach, you have to have the cursor in the middle of the 2 clips in order for it to work. If you try to do it over here, it will just not work. You need to apply it Command D just like that. Now you can, without holding Shift, just drag it from the beginning if you want to get it to 2 frames, 1 on either side, very fast. Okay, so right now it is highlighted. We can click away to verify that. We can delete it if we don't want that there. Now there are other transitions such as dip to black. We can just click that, drag it there, and what that does is, okay, we can go to dip to white. Some other transitions you can do are more animated, such as slide, where it'll actually slide the clip, or split. For example, we'll do it on this one. Now you can see it turned into red here. That means it takes more processing power and it may not play back perfectly. The yellow line means that it should be able to play back. A green line means it's fully been rendered and it'll have no problem playing back. Okay, now even though it's red, it is set to a quarter, so it had no problem playing that. However, sometimes with it being selected as red, the system will be a little sluggish and it will start to look like it's skipping frames and lagging a bit. If that's the case, you'll just have to stop, start it over again, and either render that selection, or you can simply just try to play through it again. If you do find that your system is making a lot of red points because you've added a lot of transitions or a lot of layers, or you're working with very large footage like 4K or higher, you might need to render more often. Premiere Pro should have no problem playing most footage. Again, if it does cause an issue, then what you'll need to do is render. To do so, you can render it a few different ways. You can render by selecting everything and go render selection. You can render just the audio. The audio doesn't really take much power from your system, so it's most likely not needed. Rendering in and out is if we just wanted to render this one part, so we can go right here, press I, go right after it, press O, so that we set this as our in and out. Go to sequence and render in to out. Now this is our rendering box that pops up. We can check out the details if we want. And rendering the frames, that's done now. And now you'll see that it's green. That means it has been rendered. It'll have no problem playing that section now. In most of your edits, you will want to add some sort of title or opening graphic that adds production value and establishes what your edit is. For this one, it's basically just a montage of some fall footage, so an appropriate name would be Fall 2015. So in order to create a title, we can do it a few different ways. Let's make some room here in our project panel window because this is where the title will be created. Let's close down footage. Let's close down music. Let's create a folder called titles. And because now we have 2 sequences, it might make sense to also create a sequences folder. And let's select both of those and drag those into the sequences. If you do need to pass this on to another editor, having it organized like this makes it very easy to find things. Okay, so inside titles we have nothing right now, so we need to create a title. To create a title, you go up to Title, New Title, and then you have a few different options here, so we're just going to want a default still. It won't be moving at all, so default still. This new title window will open up. We wanted the width and height of our comp, so that's fine, 1920 by 1080. Our time base is fine, and pixel aspect ratio is 1.0, which is correct. We can then name it. We'll call this intro title. Okay, so this is our type window. We have some different presets at the bottom. We have the properties on the right side. We have some different tools on the left and some options to align on the bottom left. Okay, so with our type tool selected, we can click and then start typing. If we go back to our selection tool, on the right side here we have a few different options. We can change this to bold. We can increase the font size. We can change the aspect ratio. We can change the kerning, the tracking, the small caps, and a whole bunch of other stuff, such as the fill color, and so on. So for our purposes, we will leave this at 0 and 0. We don't need anything else at this moment. So with this selected, we can click and hold and move it wherever we would like, whichever area of the frame feels good for the title. So for this one, we can move it to roughly the middle, to about there. And just to be safe and make sure that we are in the center, we can use the center alignment tool, which is the horizontal center. And that'll snap it right to the middle. If we did want to snap it as well to the vertical center, we can use that as well. But we do not want to do that in this case, so I'm going to click, hold Shift, and bring it all the way down. And if you hold Shift, if you try to move it left or right, it'll snap to the middle. Okay, so that's in the center. Now, this background is just showing you a preview of where the timeline cursor is. If I lower this, then you can see that the timeline cursor is over this clip, and that's the frame we see. So this is just a visual representation. If you don't want to see that, you can turn off the eyeball, and it'll look more like Photoshop. So when that's done, you can click the X up here, as you don't need to save it. It creates this title here, and now you can save. So Command S, and that'll save your project with this new title. Now let's place this new title in our titles folder. And if we go in here, we can find our title. I like to place titles on V3 or V4, so let's place that on V4. Let's bring our timeline cursor to the beginning, or press Home on the keyboard. And make our view a little larger. And we can also make it a little bit larger by dropping our effect controls to a smaller frame. We can also move this in a little bit more. Now that we have a title in here, it's defaulted to 10 seconds, like we set it up in the preferences, which is right here. If we want it shorter than 10 seconds, we can make it whatever we want. Let's bring it to 6 seconds and drag it here. So now for 6 seconds, we will have this on screen. Now let's zoom in just a little bit. Now because our edit point to the music was right here, you can see that right here, let's trim our title just to that spot. Now in order to have the title fade in at the beginning and fade out at the end, we need to add 2 transitions. The quick way to do this is if you select the clip and press Command D, it will automatically create one at the beginning and one at the end at the default length. If you simply only want it on the one side, let's undo that, and then without it selected, you bring your cursor to the beginning and you make sure that track is selected here. You turn off this one because we don't want it to fade here, and then you press Command D, and then it will only create it on this one because this one isn't highlighted. If you wanted to add a transition for the audio, because both are selected, you can do the same thing. You can right click at the beginning and go Apply Default Transitions, and then there is your constant power fade in. In Premiere Pro, it's called constant power. Essentially just means a fade. Okay, so if we undo that, we can also do the same thing by having the cursor at the beginning and going Command Shift D, and then that'll do the audio. Adding Shift makes it happen on the audio. Without Shift, it'll happen on video. We can increase the length of this, and then our title isn't showing up because we have a crossfade. Let's enable that again. Let's turn that one off, and let's see what it looks like so far. Okay, so when it changes to the new clip, the title disappears, which is a cool effect, and the transition happens at the beginning. Now, you'll notice when we were playing, the quality of the letters was not that great, so we can increase it a little bit, but it'll act a little slower. When we play, it should be okay though. But you'll notice the letters do look better now. Let's save that, Command S. Let's increase the fade in. Go to the beginning and see what that looks like. Great. Now if we wanted this to stand out a little more, we can add a drop shadow. So if we go up to the effects window, we can go to video effects, and then we have a whole bunch of options here. Now we could go through one by one and try to find what we're looking for, or we can simply at the top here type in what we want. Let's type in drop for drop shadow, and then anything that has drop in it shows up. So right now drop shadow, that's great. We can see that it's under the perspective tab. Let's click and drag the drop shadow down to our intro title, and then it added a slight drop shadow. Now because this is selected, we have some more options now in our effect controls. We've added a drop shadow. Okay, so if we click here, nothing shows up. If we click here, here's our drop shadow. So we can increase the opacity to 100%. We increase the distance to a little bit, and we can soften it up by about 20 pixels or so. Now without it, that's what it looks like, and with it, that's what it looks like. So it just adds just a little bit of a black edge and makes the text pop off the screen a little more. The other options, you could do shadow only, which sometimes gives a cool effect depending on the softness or the opacity or whatever the case is, or if you have other effects layered on this title. Another thing we can do is add colored backgrounds to add behind our title instead of the footage. To do this, we go to File, New, and then Color Matte. In Color Matte, we want it the same as our comp size and the same time base and the same aspect ratio. So let's go to OK. Then we have this option for choosing our color. So right now our text is white, so let's choose something that will look good as a background for white. And since our theme is fall, let's keep it towards yellows and oranges and off greens. So what we can do is maybe something like that. Choose name for a new matte. We'll call it orange. And then that'll be placed inside our titles folder, which is good for organization. We'll bring this down to here, just below. Let's zoom in a little bit and we'll trim it to our new spot here. And we will trim it so it matches the length of our title. Now let's go to the beginning of our timeline and hit play. Great, okay, so that looks a little cheesy and there's not much to it, but you get the idea. You can add different colors behind text. Another thing you could do is go to crop, and you can apply a crop onto the color matte by clicking and dragging it down and letting go. Now with this selected, you can see that the crop has been added inside the effect controls panel. And now if we go to the top part, click and drag the percentage to roughly, let's say there, and then feather the edge, which will be this edge, to there, and then further adjust the top. And then if we do the same thing to the bottom, we can start to get a really cool effect going that just shows this. Now if we wanted, we could go to the right side again and the left side and almost make just a little bit of a background for the text. If we don't like the left and right happening, we can reset those so it's more of just a banner. If we want to have a less feather, we can do that as well. And you can get some really cool effects by simply just adding a crop to a color matte and by feathering it just a little bit. You can also animate all of these with the keyframe. So for example, if we wanted the beginning to be a full frame shot, meaning the entire frame is filled with orange, what we can do is go to the top and the bottom and make those back to 0. And because we've clicked the stopwatch and we're at the beginning, At the beginning, we now have two keyframes, one for the top, one for the bottom. You can see it here on the sides. And then if we go over to, let's say, 1.5 seconds, which is 1 second, 12 frames, we can create two more keyframes. Or if we undo both of those, we can click and drag and it'll automatically create a keyframe when we start to drag. Now, let's do it the first way, so let's undo that. We'll click two keyframes, and then on those keyframes, you can see that we are on the keyframes because that is blue. If we were off of it, they wouldn't be blue. Okay, so the color may be different in your version, but when the keyframes are highlighted or when you're on it, they will show up like this, and if you're not, they'll be blank. So let's make sure we're on that, and then we can adjust this back to where we liked it. The only difference is now we have a keyframe at 1 second and 12 frames for the top and another one for the bottom. And then at the very beginning, we have another two keyframes that are set to 0. So over time, this will animate from 0 to these percentages, which are, let's make sure we're on our keyframe, which are 72 and 12.